Take away my greatest star, still have room left.
Welcome to Cross Ice Pass, episode 15. We've had a little bit of a delay, but it's the holidays and preparation. Today's interview, I'm really excited for you guys to hear my talk with a former player, fellow coach, one of my closest coaching friends. Him and I share a lot of ice time together. He's a current ESPN hockey analyst for Spanish-speaking coverage. We talk about his in our talk. We talk about his time as a youth in NYC, in a pretty odd part of the city that wasn't really hockey related. Now he's approaching his 30-year broadcast career, and there's a lot of stuff that happened in between there, playing in college, opening up a business, things like that. He's a coach that I work with often because his kids are 14U, and I coach them at 16U. So him and I are pretty close in the way we coach and kind of how we develop our kids. So I would say let's move over to Los. Well, I have been very excited to talk to this person, but we've got a lot of very noted intros. He's born in New York City, grew up in Washington Heights to Nicaraguan and Guatemalan parents, basically taught himself to ice skate after playing ball hockey on quads, played at All Hallows High School in the Bronx, played with the Binghamton Barons in the New York Penn League, played at Elmira College. After college, stayed connected to the game through coaching with youth hockey in the area. Opened a restaurant called Blue Moon Mexican Cafe with Rangers legends George McPhee, Ron Greschner, and James Patrick. A 20-year professional in the food and beverage industry as a brand expert. Is approaching 30 years in broadcasting as a Spanish language color analyst with networks such as Fox, ABC, MSG, and is currently with ESPN. Truly a great coach to so many youth hockey players in the New York City area. I've had the pleasure of being a coaching partner with Lowe's for several years. Such a spectacular teacher of the sport for tons of players in the NYC area. His wonderful wife sets up amazing meals weekly, and I cry a little when he tells me what he gets to go home to. Welcome,
Stevie,
Carlos Rossell.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Very good.
It's great to be with you.
Yeah, no, I've been
All those dates sent me back many, many years. I didn't think I was that old.
Well, the good thing is, and the listeners should know this, Carlos doesn't act that way. So I think it's a youthful living and happy environment in New York City. Everyone thinks New York City is kind of the hard, it's hard on us. But I disagree. I feel younger. I've been told that by my family in Michigan. So, Carlos, the one thing we always start with, my favorite question to start with that's important is what is your fondest hockey memory? And this can be way back, can be current. I try to dig right into the memory banks first.
Oh man, I gotta say that it really was probably making my high school team, from not knowing how to ice skate to going to this tryout in a very obscure league back when in the 70s and making a team. That was such a, I didn't know what doors it was going to open, but probably that. And then, to piggyback on that, probably being asked to play junior hockey, but for sure it was making a high school team. Because that we wouldn't be talking if that didn't happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love when it goes way back, because I know that growing up in Washington Heights, hockey wasn't really a hotbed per se. And how was that? What was your kind of talk me through kind of how that started?
Well, I grew up in a building, like most real city kids, and kids in a neighborhood. Washington Heights back in those days was a true melting pot of everybody. I mean, the whole world was there. And among the other sports that we played constantly, I noticed played a lot of football, a lot of baseball, all that stuff in the street. And one day I noticed there was a group of kids playing something on roller skates. And it might sound silly now that I didn't know what it was, but I was like, that looks kind of cool. And that's really how it was. So I saw that. I went general skating with some kids in my building on figure skates and fell all over the place. And it wasn't, I don't know if it was that same night or the next couple days that I saw something on TV, and it turned out to be a Ranger game. And I kind of put it together and went, that looks like the place I was just at. It wasn't. It was a rink, not the Garden. And that looks like what they're playing on roller skates. And that looks really cool. And I remember walking out the next day and watching them and saying, hey, can I play? And they said, well, you need skates. I didn't have them. I got these, I don't know what they cost, $5 clamp-ons. I don't know if you guys know, or friends out there know what these are, but you would tighten them down with a key around the front of your foot. And it was like a little leather strap that held it the chassis around your ankle, and you'd go out and roller skate with them. But they were just for ice skating. I mean, for roller skating. They weren't for hockey. So as you can imagine, these things were flying off my feet, and that was the journey right there. Then it was, Mom, Dad, can I have a pair of regular boot skates? And that was a conversation. What do you need those for? And that's what it was. You know, it was guys playing on the sidewalk, playing roller hockey with a roll of electrical tape, friction tape, which was the standard in those days. Just really a regular, you go to the hardware store, get a roll of electrical tape, and you kind of slide it around, and it would fly, and you can get some bombs off with it. But that was it. Yeah. Still didn't know how to ice skate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love those stories of, like, kids, especially nowadays, they don't quite realize how unavailable hockey equipment was. Even as recent as the late 80s. And it's just like, when you hear those stories about, making electrical tape hockey pucks, because you just couldn't, like, go somewhere and get hockey pucks. You didn't have Amazon, So that's a pretty great way to start it. When you went to go see hockey, who was a player that you really noticed?
The first game I saw live was either the Golden Seals or the Kings. There was a kid I went to grade school, and his dad had tickets, and I was probably around 12, and I went to the Garden. I always liked Brad Park. Always liked Brad Park, and so he was probably my guy. And in those days, the Rangers had the gag line with Hatfield and Rattel and Roger Bear. But I just liked the way Brad Park skated. He was the guy that stood out to me back.
Yeah, and he such a good legendary, defensemen now don't do that, but he stayed home, and he was hard to play against. When you see videos of him, it's unreal.
Yeah, he'd have won the Norris if it weren't for Bobby Orr.
Yeah. No, that's pretty amazing. And knowing kind of, when he first got into the NHL, then the situation of who was like getting out of Washington Heights. Well, who was like the first coach that was kind of like connecting you to actually playing some organized hockey?
Well, my high school coach was a wonderful guy named Sean Sullivan at All Hallows, and he is the guy that really taught me the rules, if you will, because I mean, you coach youth hockey, you know that a lot of these guys, a lot of players, they'll learn how to skate, they'll learn how to moderately pass, catch a pass, take a shot, but you put them in a game and they don't know which way is up. And that was this guy. I had no idea. So he was a huge influence. The guy that got me out of New York City was a guy named Lou Vero that saw me. I went to the Ocean Hockey School in Brick, New Jersey, this summer in between my sophomore and junior year of high school. So I had 2 years of high school under my belt, and Lou Vero was the guy that plucked me out of a group of players and wanted to know who I was, and there were these opportunities available if I wanted them, and I had no idea. I had no inkling what junior hockey was. That I had to move. Parents certainly didn't know about that, and so Louis. Then I mean, I've only played for 4 coaches in my life. Oddly, when you think about this, I tell a story that my college team was my 3rd team ever, which is sort of unusual. Guys that I played with in college were playing since they were mites. So Sean Sullivan, without a doubt, to answer your question.
Yeah.
From all outlets.
No, that's super. That's super interesting because I didn't know. But just so the listeners know, literally Carlos and I sit back to back and share in the locker room for the coaches at Chelsea Piers, and I didn't know that about you. Like that actually, I kind of started when I was 14 as well, and really only had a few coaches as well. And here we are, coaches now for many years, kind of talking, hockey, which is great. Because it also encourages people that I like to talk to, and even the kids we coach and things. It's okay that you didn't start when you were 6 years old, like Gretzky did or something, shooting pucks through picnic tables. So you never know how you get there, which is kind of important. But talking about when you got to juniors, before you went to Elmira, how was the Penn League? I hear so much about the Penn League, but it's only a few years, but you hear some pretty wild stories about it.
It was something I wasn't prepared for. From a hockey perspective, in terms of how the game was being played at the time, in that the Flyers were winning the Stanley Cup. And it was, for lack of a better word, a very, I'd say violent. At times it was, but it was very rough and tumble. Every team did carry some heavies, and you would get tested. And I wasn't used to that. I didn't, here the league in New York, it was the Catholic high school league, and if you looked at the ref cross-eyed, you got a penalty. And up there, it took a lot more than looking at a ref cross-eyed to get tossed, because it was very aggressive. It really was a pro style game. It was, touch icing, fight for fighting. Now, if you can imagine 16-year-olds, we might have even had 150. My line mate Jay Wall was 15, and my right winger was our oldest player, was our fighter, a guy named Ken Graveldinger. He was 18. So you have 18-year-old hard guys playing against 15-year-olds and fight for fighting. No mask, no mouth guard.
Yeah.
The whole NHL model. So it was, I'm sure that was happening in the OHL and the Quebec League too. With respect to what I expected, it wasn't anything close to what was going on down here. And it took me a bit to figure it out. I remember, some of the older guys were like, you better get in the weight room. And not something that we're encouraging now as coaches, but you better learn to fight. Or at least defend yourself. So that was an impression that, it's always stayed with me, because it was a time where, it was a different society too, so you either did or you didn't. It was the era when if a coach said, skate through the boards, you're like, okay, and I'll do it with my helmet off.
Right. Yeah.
You got hurt. It was tape and aspirin to it, that kind of thing. So
at that time, being kind of, just leading up to it too, I'm sure a kid growing up in the city, I mean, just a kid being in general, when you're a kid leaving your town or your city to go play somewhere that you're not familiar with, you got to find a billet family. And I'm sure that, Binghamton and even Elmira, they don't seem too far away from New York City, but I'm sure at the time they were like on the other side of the world.
Yeah, this is a real story. I got my first billet family lived in a very rural part of Binghamton, and I remember it was so quiet, it was deafening. That's the only term I can assign to it. And I remember after the first couple of nights of being there, I marched down to the coach's and GM's office and said, "You got to get me out of here." I said, "It's scary. It's so quiet." And I was late for school because I didn't understand the concept of a school bus versus a city bus, like an MTA bus. I I just had never dealt with it. I knew if I was running a few minutes late, instead of taking the bus, I would take the subway here in New York as a 12-year-old. Imagine that. Now, I'm a 16-year-old and I come out and the mom says, "What are you still doing home?" It was 8:30 or something, or 8. And I said, "School doesn't start till 8:30, whatever." She goes, "Well, you missed the bus." I said, "I'll take the next one." I said, "No, there is no other bus. The bus comes by here at 6 a.m. I said, 6 a.m. Why in the world would I get on a bus at 6 if I don't have to be there until 8:30? So that was a very strange thing. So that was an adjustment. But they
Yeah.
moved me. They moved me to half a block from the rink, and it was probably the best move ever because now I got to skate anytime I wanted. I'd get home from school, and it was so close to the rink, and I would skate 5 hours a day, which was it's such a you think back about what a gift that was.
Yeah, and when you're a teenager and just kind of starting your hockey journey, and all you want to do is be on the ice. Because in some ways, I mean, for myself, I always felt I was behind a bit, and I'm like, okay, I just have to be on the ice as much as possible. I was assistant coaching. I was like trying to find ice. I was down at the lake, as much as I possibly could. So you kind of get once the bug bites you, as I like to say, um, you can't get away from hockey. It's impossible.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I loved it. I loved it. Having access to our own rink was a game changer,
yeah,
and I took every opportunity.
yeah. When one thing I wanted to ask you, because it kind of leads into some later questions, is that when you were in school that far away from the city, that kind of like suburban rural area, um, and I know you grew up in a Spanish speaking household. How did when did people figure out that you knew how to speak Spanish?
Well, it's interesting because when I went to play junior, I don't think I spoke Spanish ever there. Um, I think I probably took a Spanish class because it's part of the curriculum. But besides that, I didn't. When I got to college, I never did until I was around a couple of exchange students, excuse me, that were from Spain, and they needed help with something at the student union. And I started speaking Spanish to them, and they looked at me, "You speak Spanish? But you're one of the hockey guys." It was very funny. Um, so there wasn't really a whole lot of it, to be honest with you. There was no one to speak it to. I was with 20 hockey players. If anything, some might have spoken French. The Canadian guys, but that was
Right.
about it.
Yeah. They all spoke 4-letter swear words about every
Right,
3 minutes.
right,
So
right. Yep.
the normal hockey lingo. No, that's interesting because I was kind of curious how a kid from Washington Heights that's because Spanish speaking in the sport is not as common as it probably was back then, and now it's starting to grow a bit. Um, and of course, thanks to the things you're doing professionally, but um, going back as well. And it's interesting you mentioned college, just because I'm kind of curious because I have a couple friends that played at Elmira, and the campus is absolutely stunning, and it's a really old college. And how was the experience at Elmira?
It was amazing. Our first coach, the guy that recruited me, is a guy named Barry Smith. And you know Barry's name. Barry, I think, has 4 cups, maybe 5 with Scotty Bowman.
Yep.
And was an amazing teacher and demanded the most. He demanded 100%. And his line was, if you, not his line, I'm sure he didn't invent it, but he was an advocate of fitness. And if you don't push past your comfort zone, whatever you're doing, you're not going to get better at it. And he drove us hard. A lot of dry land, a lot of stuff that is now common. Off ice training. I was introduced to it. I actually did play on another team called the Springfield Olympics in the New England Junior League. Binghamton had folded, and my buddy Hap Grabbeldinger, who was an All-American at Elmira, we played 1 year in Springfield, and Barry was very close with the Picks organization, and he would come. That's where I actually got recruited to Elmira, was in Springfield. As a defenseman, I'm a forward. Introduced off-ice training because he had been in Sweden, and that was commonplace. So a lot of that work ethic, the preparation needed off-ice, and what you really need to do on the ice every time you're out there was drilled in. Every day was a tryout, more or less. Every day you went on the ice. It's the old adage, you're as good as your last shift, practice included.
Yeah. I have a question about that that's kind of interesting, is the fact that I know college now, college sports now has, these massive fitness workout, these huge gyms and this huge training ethic. And it's kind of interesting to know was when you were playing with Springfield and Binghamton, was the difference between junior training and college training. Sounds like college, even back then, was kind of a little bit more connected to what was going on in other athletics as well.
Yeah. I mean, the years in Binghamton, we didn't do any of it. There was a weight room that was under the bleachers, and if you wanted to use it, you could. It wasn't really demanded of you. When we got to college, there was dry land training pre-season, and it was all plyometrics. It was all using your own body. So it was a little more intense. During the season, it wasn't used as much because remember, it was like the 80s, and it was everybody lined up on the red line, blue line back, red line back. It was just suicides. That was your workout. And a buddy of mine, his name is Mark Taylor. He's been the head coach at Hobart for 25 years, and they just won the NCAA Division III title last year. Tails and I would, after every practice, get on the ice and do tons of push-ups. I mean, a few hundred. And, I talk to Mark a lot, and he's like, "You still doing push-ups?" I go, "Oh, yeah. Just something, then it becomes a lifestyle thing, But that was about it. You did it on your own. Once the season got going, just like the pros, the pros now, their practices they're not really doing sprints. It's 30, 45 minutes, to go over the PP or the PK or something, and that's kind of what it was like then for, regular season stuff. It was all off season.
They're mostly burning energy or burning calories sitting on the bike or something before the game or after morning practice or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's so wild because when I think about that, I think about, of course, in the miracle that Herb Brooks created, and then you see the movie and how hard he was pushing the kids, and some of the documentaries, and that kind of college ethics as far as like fitness and working hard off the ice and on the ice. Of course, brought the gold medal against a team that in Russia that we know now, and historically, the Russian programs were constantly off the ice. They were training year round. So it's interesting to kind of see that evolution of college hockey now, because now these guys, they're pro athletes when they walk out of when they walk off the campus and get drafted. So it's so wild to think of that nuance and how it's kind of slowly progressed over the years, but there's some training things that have definitely switched things up a bit. So when it comes to training and some of the fitness things that you kind of had and found out about in college and some of the other places you've played, was that kind of like training ethic? Was that what brought you to kind of thinking about coaching, or when did you kind of like start plugging into carrying a whistle?
We started we started with hockey camps back in, I want to say, '86. A buddy of mine, Hap Grabelinger, who I mentioned before, was in the rink business, and we we started going to camps in the Mid Atlantic, Raleigh, North Carolina, Birmingham, Alabama. I had worked some clinics upstate New York when I played juniors. That doing that in the '80s was something that honestly was more like a paycheck, because I would do it on my off time. But I found that I enjoy doing it, and it to this day it always takes me back to when I started teaching myself, because there were no private lessons in those days, and if there were, I certainly didn't have the economic ability to do it. So it was just doing it, and then finding out that I enjoyed it back then. When the old Sky Rink in New York City was around, I used to run some clinics, which actually led me to ESPN, for adults and for kids. It was a volunteer thing. You got to play in the men's league for free, so that was motivation. But that was pretty. I guess to answer your question, it started back in the '80s, doing camps right out of college, and seeing that I enjoyed it, because it was kind of like, I wish someone had shown me this, and I was able to share it, and kind of pay it forward thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned you kind of teaching yourself to skate, because one thing I'm curious about with that, especially, if a kid wanted to learn how to skate now, there's so much access. Not only is there tons of coaches and trainers, but like you say, even I was that way too. My dad's buddy at the shop like taught me how to play, how to skate, but because we couldn't afford like big private lessons and things like that. And then on top of that, there's no access to something on YouTube that you can try to figure out, or there wasn't the internet. You couldn't find like coaching programs and things like that. So how was trying to teach yourself hockey without having that kind of access, or just teaching yourself how to skate?
Yeah, it was trial and error. Go to the rink, and fall and get up, and you mimic. I remember watching kids that. That's what I said to you. Like, making my high school team was such a big thing, because I would go to the rink, and you have to aspire to something. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Whether it's sports or you know something you're going to do for a career in business. But I remember watching hockey games at the rink that I used to skate at. It was a place called Riverdale Rink in the Bronx, and I would stand, and but it wasn't even glass; it was chicken wire, and look in, and watch how these kids would turn, and I would I was a baseball player. I played football. I was a lot of sandlot stuff that we did in the city. Our neighborhood, that would be a whole different podcast of the type of athletes that came out of my neighborhood: Olympic judo guys, and Olympic boxers, which is that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
So we were very athletic as a group, and there was almost shame in not being good. That's a different lane in today's society, where if you weren't good, you got called out on it, and you either rose above or you did something else. But no one did something else. Everyone kind of stuck to it. So that was
Right.
the self-taught thing. It was like, I'm going to get this. I'm going to get this. And just like everyone else, stopping was a nightmare to say the least. And skating straight was pretty easy. The rest of it was challenging, but that was all mimicking, watching. And like you said, had YouTube been around, then you have skating instructors telling you how to stand. You start with that. Most people, when you watch them, I teach for a living now, so it's you have to bend your knees or all that stuff. There was no one there to tell you that. So it was watching what what I deemed to be the better guys were doing, and just trying to do it myself.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. I mean, the thing is that's kind of sad is that the all that data is there, and the kids we coach sometimes you kind of just want to send them a link, be like, hey, just check this out. I don't know if they look at it, but
Yeah.
it's I think because it's accessible, they don't want to look at it. But man, I can't even imagine when we were younger, just like, because I was learning in the early 90s, and that was just before the internet. You were learning, way before that. And, not too long though. But, one thing that I think about that, I was starting to remember, and, of course, when I talk to our fellow coaches that know you well and kind of thinking about the years, and I'm like, how long has Carlos really been doing this? And do you have any idea how many players you've helped or worked with?
Oh, geez. I mean, going back to the 80s, I had kids walking in. So you mentioned Blue Moon. I had kids walking into Blue Moon in the mid to late 90s that were already in their 20s that said, hey, do you remember me? You coached me at, the Ice House in Raleigh back in 1985 or 1986. And, they're 25 years old. I don't know what the math is on that, because there were
Right.
our camps. We had 75 to 100 kids in those camps for almost a decade. Maybe 8 years. I don't know specifically what it was. The East Coast League came in and we absorbed some of their skaters. Once the Hurricanes came in, that was the end of our camp in Raleigh.
Right.
It's Skyrink in New York City. Mutual friend of ours that Craig Woodcock, who is the director of camps at Chelsea Piers, was in a clinic I taught when he was a little boy. I don't
That's
have a finite number. I don't know. It's a lot of kids.
yeah. I figured that would be the case just because I knew you'd probably kind of talk through it for the fact that you've been coaching longer than I have, but I'm getting there. It's been 20 years or so for me, and kind of funny. It's really fun to kind of run into those kids, and you're like, hey, coach,
Yeah.
you remember me? And you're like, yeah. And you're like, of course, I don't know what your line is. My first thing is, you're still playing?
Yeah. I ask that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the key. And that's the key of us as coaches is I don't want them to ever forget hockey because it's done so much for me, and just as you've mentioned already, how much it's done for you, and coaching while you're owning a restaurant and a business is probably kind of sucked up some time trying to switch between coaching and the restaurant, but speaking of Skyrink and ESPN, what got you into this whole idea of being an analyst for hockey, especially a Spanish speaking analyst?
Right. I had always toyed with the idea of doing television voiceover work. People had commented, it's you have the appropriate tone for this type of work, and it's what I learned quickly was that if you have that gig, you don't want to give it up, and you don't want to share the info with anyone. So that got put aside. I was teaching a clinic at the old Skyrink, and a woman approached me and asked me a whole bunch of questions about my hockey bio and where was I from and did I play pro hockey, and your name is Carlos. Do you speak Spanish? And I said, yes. Why are you asking me these questions? Turns out that a neighbor of hers, a guy named Rob Abramowitz, who is now the voice of the New York City Soccer Club, had been hired by Fox to do the NHL on Fox in Spanish. For those of you who may remember, that era is when they had the glow puck, the tracer puck, which turned out to be the technology that is now used for football for the first down markers. And she asked me if I was interested. Of course, the answer was yes. I went through the series of interviews with people, and one funny thing is that when I met the guy that eventually hired me, he said, your hockey bio is in order, your references are in order. My references were, you mentioned before, George McPhee and knew Sam Rosen. And it's like, these people? Yeah, because of my restaurant. And he says, you don't sound like you speak a word of Spanish. And it was, so we started speaking Spanish, and he was like, wow, that's amazing, because, it just didn't seem like he spoke Spanish. So that started back in 97. And I remember going into the studio. In fact, we did a Ranger Red Wing game from the Joe at the studio, Fox here on 60-something Street on the East Side. And an engineer told me, push this button for this, push that button if you want to cough. And this talks to me in the booth. And he puts a headset on me, and he counts down. And he goes, you're on. And before I knew it, the game was over. And he said to me, you've never done this before? And I said, no, because it seems like you've been doing it your whole life. And then that kind of threw me back to when we were all kids, when we all were playing sandlot. We played stickball, and we would always announce ourselves, how batting Mickey Mantle, back in my day, or whatever it was. And, ground ball to whatever. And so I'm sure every kid did it. Whether you can take it and use it professionally is a different story. It just came out. And what surprised me was that I was able to do it in Spanish, because the terms aren't there. There weren't there wasn't a glossary or a book that had hockey terms in Spanish. So that was an interesting time, because we invented it. Like I like to believe that we invented it with the group that I was with. They were called Smart Sports. And that guy's name was Clemson Smith Muniz and Alvaro Martin. And Alvaro was, until recently, with ESPN doing baseball. So you guys might know his name. And we would sit in an office. How do you say this? How do you say, go into Spanish, you're like icing? Literally in Spanish would be congelamiento. And that doesn't really make sense. If you are, a new listener, it's like, well, freezing is really kind of what it means, icing. So we just went with the terms in English. And when it made sense to translate something where it had a real direct meaning, tripping, there was, zancadilla, that if you say that to someone on the street, you trip me. That's what that means. But there were other things that clearly with hockey just don't apply, that at times we just kind of go with it. Kenny, my partner, my play-by Ken Garay, who was an award-winning play-by-play guy on ESPN. The way we do it is he'll say something off air. I will tell him things about the sport. This over the years, not this and that new stuff. And he'll always reference it first and say, hey, coach, calls me coach on the air. Hey, in English, head on a swivel. That's one. That's a big one. He goes, head on a swivel, like you say in English, coach. Tell us what that means, and we'll just kind of go with a narrative about it, because there isn't really a phrase that resonates,
Yeah.
with that.
Is there what's the most, other than icing? What's the most common one that
Offside.
offside?
Offside. Yeah, probably offside. Fuera de lugar, fuera de juego. It's, it just happens all the time. And we get a lot of, we receive a lot of tweets on the air from all over Latin America asking for explanations of what to you and I are very common things, and seem contradictory to the eye. A scuffle in the corner, a series of blows are exchanged. Well, on the street, that's a fight.
Right.
And last game, they each were punished, but tonight they weren't. Why? And it's a good conversation to have when you're teaching the game to a new audience in Latin America, because then you're able to speak about the temperature of the game. What's been happening historically? These two teams might have this type of animosity towards one another, and the referees. You can explain that if the ref were to call every penalty, what seems to be a penalty, we'd be here for 5 hours. So you kind of let them play and say, guys, calm down a little bit, and the psychology of the game and how the flow goes is always a great discussion to have on the air.
You ever think about, the one to the listeners, the one major reason I wanted to talk to Carlos is that it's so interesting to me to think about him, like actually just talking people through a sport that is predominantly never thought about in Spanish, in so many different countries, and a lot of countries that, just like Washington Heights hockey, that had ball hockey and hockey wasn't a big thing. Has anyone ever reached out to you or sent you a fan mail or anything like that from any of these locations? Just because I'm really curious to know. I'm hoping that people are really listening, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious as to where.
Yeah. I'm not a big social media guy, but I do have LinkedIn. And through LinkedIn, a lot of our listeners in South America have reached out to connect. And we use Kenny's Twitter or X handle to while we're on live, and we get. It's all over South America. It's Chile in particular. If you're familiar with the LATAM Cup, LATAM, Colombia's won it, Puerto Rico won it most recently. They also include Jamaica in that. I think Egypt actually played too. So what the LATAM Cup is it's a collection of teams that just aren't up there with the rest of the hockey playing world. But yeah, people have reached out, and we know they're listening because we hear from them every game, and it's many of the same listeners and often a lot of new ones. And it's an easy explanation sometimes because the whole world plays soccer. And it's one of the questions I ask kids that are here in New York that are beginners. Say, hey, you play soccer? And yes, no, maybe, whatever. But it's the same game when you think about it. Put it in that net, keep it out of yours. A lot of things happen in the middle. 2-on-1s, offensive strategies, ball movement, puck movement. Lacrosse, same game. Even basketball, for that matter. Ball movement, spatial awareness, head on a swivel kind of thing. It doesn't change. Your awareness as the player is the same in these sports. It's just that in our game, you have to do it with skates on and a stick and a slippery disc that's spinning all over the place. And by the way, someone's going to hit you.
Yeah. Definitely keep your head on a swivel, or at least keep your head up.
Right.
That's really awesome to hear that fans are reaching out to you and to kind of know where where ESPN Plus and ESPN being such a huge worldwide sports connector, it's really awesome and lovely, and it gives me all the warm feels inside for the fact that it's so great to know that there's other places that are connecting to this. It doesn't just have to be the U.S., Canada, Sweden, Finland, Russia, the usual suspects. And I think when I look back at like the Mighty Ducks, for instance, especially Mighty Ducks 2, when they, of course, one team from Minnesota can just be the American team. But that's why it was a little far fetched. That's why it was pretty great that they had like Trinidad and Tobago in there, and they had some other countries that you would never think are hockey. And for the listeners, I highly recommend looking up some of these second tier teams that don't play in major national competition, because there are teams from Mexico and teams from the Caribbean and teams from South America and even teams from the Middle East. It's definitely a really, if you really love the sport, it's definitely a great place to kind of poke your nose into and see what's going on, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Just based on our listeners and what we know, the feedback we get from our production people, people are listening. And I know they're playing, because I run into people in New York. Over the years, we've gotten kids from Mexico at our hockey camp, and the parents will send me video. And to add to what your question about who is reaching out to you, I will get an email while I'm on the air from a parent of a kid that was a student at the Chelsea Piers hockey camp. Hey, we're listening to you from Mexico. So it's how cool is that? It's like, wow,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
that's amazing. I mean, one thing, because I know that this broadcasting thing, Los, that you've kind of been doing now for so many years, kind of got put in your lap by this person from ESPN or from Fox that thought you'd be great. Um, what do you see kind of leading forward in this, as far as growing the game in Latin America, growing the game in Spanish speaking countries, and how what you're doing currently can kind of move the ball forward, we'll say, in the future?
The broadcast helped for sure, but as well as I do that it comes down to economics. And is there a rink? Once the rink is up, the sustainability, the economies of keeping a facility like that going, and do you have a big enough population of players, and throw in some recreational skaters and people that might want to figure skate too, to support this type of building. It's expensive. And that's probably, I know for a fact that is an issue. I'm in touch with, the head of the Puerto Rican national team, Scott Vargas, and they play out of Florida because they can't sustain a rink in Puerto Rico. They had a rink in Puerto Rico, and a hurricane, I think it was Maria, one of the hurricanes, blew it away. And all of the economics is what's coming into play here, because it's, what do we put up, a rink, or do we build something that we know the community is going to use more, whatever that may
Yeah,
be, whether it's a learning center or whatever. But that's an issue. That's an issue that
yeah,
I've heard through and through, and you hear that in the States too. So it's not. So you can imagine that for a part of the world where it is not a go-to sport, you need one soccer ball and 22 people play. You need one basketball. You know what I mean? With hockey, I do know that a lot of countries are playing roller hockey. A friend of mine from Barcelona, there's a lot of roller hockey's huge in Europe, Spain.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been absorbed in Latin America, South America, Mexico.
Well, I think obviously the fact that refrigeration has brought hockey into the forefront of being a great cold weather sport, because the weather is starting to slow. The world is starting to slowly warm up, but also thinking about technology, and now that there's when I was a kid, and you especially know this, there wasn't like synthetic ices, and you know I I was right at the age when inlines came out, and that's kind of what gave me access to it, because I couldn't get in my rink. It was expensive, um, and it was kind of packed for a greater sense of the word. But the thing that I love about is all these kind of things are coming together, and I think that I'm 45, and I think in my life in the next 30 years, um, we might see more we might hear more about these Spanish speaking countries, and we might they might you never know, make it to where we think they can be bigger. And I really love I love and kind of I love that idea and that dream about how hockey can be everywhere, and it's slowly, piece by piece, coming through. And the fact that fans have access to great NHL coverage and can understand the game, and sorry, and you being such a great coach and good advocate for them, and giving them kind of accessible, understandable information is crucial.
Yeah, it's the exposure to the sport is huge, because when you think about the U.S. and Canada, I've always felt that our better athletes in a different time were baseball, football, basketball. Even soccer was kind of an outlier in the United States, right? And it seems that other countries, the usual suspect countries, Canada, Sweden, Russia, that they were molding their better athletes, their best athletes, to become hockey players. And not to mention how accessible it was. I have many friends that I played with from Canada, and heard firsthand stories. Oh, when I was a kid, it cost $1, or nothing. The town paid for it, and you got everything. Um, so the exposure to, in general, is huge. And then, can you get your better athletes, to start taking it in, and becoming better at it? That's when you start seeing the change. When it's just like the random kid that didn't play anything, and you see that sometimes. It's like, oh, this is the only thing I do, is I only play hockey. And trying to explain um, the the athletic thinking to them sometimes is a little difficult, because they haven't played anything else. Where if you get that kid that's like a really, really good athlete that understands space and time and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, exposure to the better athletes is a big thing, I think. It's just my
Yeah,
opinion.
for sure. No, it's great. I mean, Carlos, a big born New Yorker, um, Washington Heights, such a great coach. So happy to be able to share the ice with you as much as I have been able to. And thanks for giving us such insight into what you're doing as not only your hockey career, but also what you're doing as an analyst. And and I think the listeners are going to be very they're going to be very. I'm going to hear some things from them about our conversation for sure. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And it's a pleasure working with you always. And you do a great job out there yourself. We're lucky to have a guy like you also. So
Thanks.
keep it
And for
going, man.
anyone that wants to, if you come to Chelsea Piers on the weekend, you'll probably run into one of us. Mostly Carlos, because he's there all the time.
Yep.
Thanks, Carlos.
All right, guys. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye. That was such a great talk with Los. He's such a great coach, such a good friend, and as as you guys got to see, just the way he speaks, definitely owns the room when he talks. So you got to see that he has the voice made for it. Also, just nice to discuss the outreach of the sport into Spanish speaking nations as well, as Spanish speakers in North America. I mean, the thing that was really cool, and I really was happy he touched base on, because I had heard about it from him before, having a soda after after we're done coaching. He talked to me about how he has to really change a lot of how the Spanish language is used to for hockey to be understood. And I think him being a coach really really makes that huge, especially how he kind of talked about how offsides and icing kind of sounds different in the Spanish language. So they have to figure ways to kind of explain that, which is great. Um, it was such a good talk. Carlos is such a good guy. I think if you live in New York City and you're listening to this and you want to take a coaching lesson with uh, with Carlos, definitely do it. If you have children that want to learn how to play, just learn how to ice skate, he's he's the guy. Um, Definitely reach out to Sky Rink or Chelsea Piers and see if you can get some time with him, because he's such a great youth hockey coach, and I've seen him create some really good hockey players, and he's just a great guy. So jump into that, and it was really lovely talking with him about it. Um, well, that's kind of finishes up episode 15. Um, the next episode might be after Christmas. I don't think I'll release an episode on Christmas Eve. We'll see what happens on my days off here. Enjoying my holiday. I do have to get some dental work done, so we'll see how that ends up. But anyway, today's song is by a band not necessarily local to me, but they're from Wales. I have some apparently Ancestry.com says I have family from Wales, so we'll see how that goes. But they have the coolest name in music, and it lines up a lot with hockey. The band is called Hockey Dad. They have a new single out, and that's the one we're using. And I'll put all their info down below. Um, Also, I want to say a big piece of news. The website is live, and that is now how I want to kind of market and show ways of how we're going to move this thing around. Um, there are some bars and places in New York City that will be getting Crosswise Pass coasters, so that you can just snag your phone and get on the QR code, so you can start to listen and start to be a subscriber and a listener. I've got some pretty interesting marketing ideas. I'm working on some pucks that have QR codes. I'm working on some ways of building a hockey jersey, so that when I visit or go to any game, someone can kind of use the QR code on my jersey to connect. So, trying to use any way I can think of in hockey um, to really market and get more listeners and get more people involved in this. But the key component is you. I need you to tell all your friends about Cross Ice Pass. And if they're like, "Oh, that sounds cool," you need to send them a link. You need to be a little, not aggressive, but a little direct. So, and that would be a big help to me and a big help to the growth of the pod, because the more it grows, the more unique my guests can be, the more well known my guests can be, and it'll be a big help for me and for you, the listener. Um, so again, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. Without you without you telling me what you think about this, I'll never know if I'm doing it right or wrong. So, um, definitely get on the website. The website is crossicepass.com. Yes, no one has that. I own that URL. So pretty pumped that no one else has taken that yet. It seems like a pretty common term in our sport. So yeah. Um, if I don't see you, happy holidays, and we'll see you guys soon. Remember, I'm gonna throw that puck cross ice right on your tape, so you can just drive it top cheddar, baby. Here we go. Have a good one.
You can take